real big fault for a lot of folks right now is when they get a break, they jump on their device
Yeah.
and they start to scroll. And while it's appealing and you do get a little bit of a dopamine hit, your attentional systems actually drain. Whereas going outside, looking at landscapes, being by water, mountains, trees, charges the batteries just a bit faster. And so then when you come back, you have more energy to lock in and focus.
Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Tempe. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today we have Dr. Justin Anderson joining us from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Justin is a licensed psychologist and one of the country's leading high-performance sports psychologists, the founder and CEO of Premier Sports Psychology, a Minneapolis-based firm whose team has worked with elite athletes and organizations across the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, and the Olympics, along with executives and leaders. A certified mental performance consultant and a former collegiate quarterback himself, he's just released his first book, Intentional Attention, The Science and Practice of Focus Under Pressure. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Andy, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You're only 2.5 hours north of us by car up there in Minneapolis. I'm down here in La Crosse, so it's almost like we're next door neighbors in the grand scheme of things.
That's right. That's right.
And for those watching on video, you will notice that I have my Snoopy coffee mug. I always have it with me. And Charles Schultz obviously was from the Minneapolis area. So just some fun facts for our listeners.
Great. Still got those statues all over St. Paul. That's for sure.
I know. I love it. Justin, tell us the elevator pitch version of your story.
Well, elevator pitch is I got really interested in psychology because I wanted to work not necessarily with populations that were struggling in a sense, but really wanted to elevate their game. And so I got really interested in performance psychology, and positive psychology was just starting to bloom at that time. And so there was this angle of looking at how do we improve our mental wellness and mental performance so that we can be our best selves. And that's really what drew me into this field. And from there, I studied all over the country. Here in Minnesota, played quarterback at Duluth, University of Minnesota, Duluth, and then went out to Boston University for my master's. Came back, got my doctorate at St. Thomas, then down to Memphis, Tennessee, University of Memphis for pre-doctoral fellowship, and then University of North Texas and Denton, Texas for postdoc. And then took me up to consulting work in Kansas and then back up into Minneapolis.
Justin, I'm still stuck on Duluth. The coldest I've ever been in my life was in Duluth.
Try playing football out there, outdoors. Yeah, it was
just
cold.
Marveling at the concept. And there's a lot of Minnesota that's above Duluth, by the way, for our listeners.
So true. True.
Justin, what's an event in your life that just put rocket boosters behind your career?
You know, it was a great question. You sent that along to me before, and I was thinking about that. You know, the one thing that sort of piqued me, or, you know, it's interesting how life happens. And at the time you think something so devastating or crushing could be something that actually propels you into something better. But right after my postdoc at the University of North Texas, I was applying for very few sport and performance psychology jobs around the country. One that had opened up was at KU, University of Kansas, and it was in the James Naismith Arena. It was going to be working with their basketball teams and football teams and, you know, some really great people. I was super excited about it. I was one of 2 finalists and did not get the position. And that door shutting then propelled me to get into more of the organizational consulting space because there weren't sport and performance psychology. So I got into doing consulting work with family-owned and privately held businesses. And that really got me to understand leadership and systemic performance on the business side. of things. So not only the individual performer, but an organizational system performer. And I got to do that for 5 years, which helped pay off some student loans and, all those other things that, go along with trying to get these educational degrees and certificates. But it really propelled me into assessment and understanding how human development worked in the corporate space. And then I've used that now to also develop athletes, and we brought a lot of the corporational, is so advanced compared to some of the sports side in terms of developing coaches and front office and staff. We brought a lot of that over to the side of sports. And so then I learned, now I get to parlay both of those lanes. I get the opportunity to be in the sports side where I learned all about this optimal human performance. So how do we optimize ourselves, which plays really nicely into the corporate side, which I'm sure we'll dive into in a little bit here, because it includes how do we do attentional training. But then I learned from the corporate side, how do they develop and create organizational systems for efficiency, communication, trust, culture, all those things that we can bring to the sports side.
Yeah, it just dawned on me while you were giving that explanation. On the business side, we pay attention to process, procedure. We're really focused on our intention and building structures and teams. But we're really bad at taking care of our physical selves.
That's it.
And then on the sports side, we're really good at taking care of our physical selves. But what about the systems and the structure?
You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
And that was surprising to me when I got into the pro sports space. I thought, you think about leadership and you think there's a lot of, they do a lot of talks in these spaces. But what these coaches who've become these great, leaders, and you hear the locker room talks, and they're motivating, they're really good at driving that, but they know the X's and O's. What they don't often understand is how to develop systems, like you just said, to really optimize their teams and their trust and their repeatable cultures.
Yeah. Okay. So light bulb moment for Andy Tempe on the show. That's just awesome. So tell us about Premier Sport Psychology, the business that you run. It's now a field that's grown crowded with mindset coaches and performance gurus. What is your company's it factor? What differentiates you from everybody else?
Yeah, we started Premier really almost out of necessity because there weren't any jobs in this space, and I still really love the performance psychology piece. And I started to see more and more people finding this interest. I started to see the NCAA starting to recommend sport and performance psychology. But then, to your point, the field's just sort of ballooned and grew, and so we were on the front end of that. And one of the things that sets Premier apart from, I think, a lot of these spaces, or a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of people are entering the space. We take a team approach. And so our team is our first it factor that we have, which is we recognize that one size doesn't fit all and that we can't be competent in every area of human development. And so we have people who have specific competencies in certain areas. And we cover the entire spectrum of psychology. So I'm a licensed psychologist, which means we can diagnose and treat mental health. And we have a lot of doctors and licensed mental health counselors on our staff that can help people get what we call restore their mental health back to a healthy place. And then we also have what we call the dual credential. So we also have the other side of that spectrum, which is performance optimization. And so a lot of times we have athletes that will sort of slide back and forth, or executives that they're doing okay, and then something hits and all of a sudden they get into a deficit place, and we're really trying to work to get their health and their mental health back to a place. And then there's others that come in and say, I just want to be more resilient. So it's starting to help them create some of the structures around their mental health that also will help ensure them and make them more resilient to not dive into deeper anxiety or depression. But also, we find that there are high correlations to performance optimization. So they can be better in higher stress situations more consistently.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Tell us about the book Intentional Attention. I love the title. It's kind of hard to say. You gotta really be intentional about
You do.
saying intentional attention. I'm holding the book up here for our YouTube viewers. But tell us about the book. And I always like to ask, if you were sitting on an airplane and somebody sitting next to you had the book, what would you want their unaided recall of the book to be?
Yeah, great pointed question. I think the number one thing we're hoping that people get out of the book, and this is not just for athletes, it's a book for everyone, but it is that attention is our greatest tool to help with not only performance, but mental wellness. And one thing that we aren't talking enough about in this culture is how much our attention is getting pulled in many directions, and how draining that can be on our system. I mean, we see in the corporate spaces that we work, a lot of owners are coming to us saying, we have a burnout problem. Our highest performers are burning out. How do we help? And how do we drive that? And work-life balance isn't the solution anymore, because we're finding that, that taking time off is great, but for the highest level of people, as you know, they don't really get time off. Even when they're on vacation,
Yeah.
they're getting pinged or they have somebody asking a question, and we're always tethered to our devices and to our work. So it's now becoming the real game is becoming, how do I recharge while running? And if I really want to be elite, I can't not outwork others. There's no shortcut in any profession, anything that I've seen. To be the best or to really grow, you have to work really hard. And what though does that require? We need to find systems and tools to recharge us while we're working. And that's what this book is all about.
That's good. Well, the heart of the book is a claim that I find genuinely hopeful, that attention isn't a fixed trait that you're born with, but a skill that you can train, and that pressure doesn't create your patterns as much as reveal them. And spoiler alert for our listeners, in September, I'm talking to a guy named Ian Stewart, who is built a business called Hidden Patterns, which is a very similar concept, that pressure reveals really kind of who you are. Can you unpack that for our listeners? What does the science say about how attention really works, and how do we train it?
Yeah, it is a really cool thing. And the reason why we landed on attention as being the lever that we use is that it is trainable and that it is controllable, more controllable than emotions, more controllable than our thoughts. And so, we think about try to be positive, try to be positive. Well, yeah, be positive, but then all of a sudden something hits and you get a multiple hits. Sometimes really hard to be positive. So we find that oftentimes can take people, and then they start to shame themselves or get off track because they're not feeling very positive because of the adversity that just hit. However, attention, on the other hand, we can still get back to sort of performance relevant cues or things that we know lead us to more success and more health. If we lock in on that, we got to understand what those are. But this all came out of really about 20 years of work with elite athletes. And a lot of times these athletes would come in and say, I just want to feel more confident. When I'm confident, I perform really well. And so then we started to unpack that, and we said, well, when do you feel most confident? Well, they felt most confident when results were going. But that didn't help then when they were in a slump or when they got, a setback. And a lot of the work that I do today is with NFL quarterbacks. So I have a lot of NFL quarterbacks on our caseload for multiple teams around the league. And it's a really neat space to be, because I think quarterback is such a visible space to see performance, whether it's working or whether it's not. And so a lot of times we'd see these athletes go into these really high pressure situations and they wouldn't perform to the level that they wanted to. And they were like, why? And well, we started to look at all the different mental skills and all the different mechanisms that they had. And the one thing that stood out consistently was that where their attention went, dictated whether or not they were able to perform well in high pressure situations. Confidence would ebb and flow too much. They couldn't keep
Mm.
that sustainable, but attention they could once they understood. Like when I'm in high pressure situations, my attention tends to go here naturally. And if it goes there, I don't perform well. But
Mm.
it, being that it's controllable, if I understand where when the pressure rises, if I put my attention here, something that is much more constructive for your performance, it starts to steady and it gives the opportunity for more clutch performances under pressure, on demand, or when fatigued.
All right. Well, after the quick commercial break here, I want to explore that concept not for NFL quarterback because there are only a handful of those on the planet, but we're going to talk more about Susie, who is the manager of the customer service department at company XYZ, and how she can use some of these tools. So we're going to come back with Justin Anderson in just a moment. And we're back with Dr. Justin Anderson talking about attention as a trainable skill and how to hold on to it when everything is competing for it. Justin, I want to bring this into the world that most of our listeners live in, and I have to confess that this question I'm about to ask hits really close to home. I'm really struggling with this right now. On any given day, I'm bouncing between projects and this new growing stack of AI tools, just trying to keep all the plates spinning. And there are moments that I feel like I'm standing in the cereal aisle looking at so many choices that I just freeze instead of moving. Now, take my experience and multiply that by every employee in a company XYZ that's being told to get more out of the company's AI investment and learn faster than ever before. There's a term called context switching that really applies here. And what is all this context switching actually doing to our attention, and can we train our way out of it?
Yeah, you actually can. And the context switching is a really great piece to bring up, Andy, because what people don't realize is how much energy has to go into to reset and get into the new context. Unless we are prepared for it, unless we have some intentionality around it, and we have a plan to do it. If we're just sort of leaving it to our own devices, it oftentimes takes a lot amount of time to get in from one thing to the next. A lot of people say, oh, I'm a great multitasker. And what we find is you might be able to switch from one thing to the other, but we can't fully concentrate on one thing at any given time, more than one thing at any given time. So we have to switch contexts, and that context switching is a very valuable resource that gets pulled significantly today. And I think it's part of why we're seeing sort of so many people feeling like they're in this storm, where, like you pointed out, you're at the grocery store aisle and you're looking at all these choices. I just don't know which thread to pull on. And so we get into that space. We just had an executive ownership group reach out to us for this very thing, saying our highest performers are getting kind of bogged down by so much of this information that's coming. And what we're finding is the data is so readily available, but the wisdom on how to use it and what to do with it efficiently is not. And so we are now in the process of training that. And we believe that attention is the tool to do that. And there's structure that we have, and we outline that in the book around how do you go about doing this. It's not a light switch. It's not just, oh, shake my head and, now I'm locked in. There are mechanisms that we want to put in place, just like anything. If we're building a muscle, you just don't go to the gym one time and, all of a sudden I can lift great weights. You got to start to practice it and rep it and then become really, really effective with it.
Yeah, so let's dive a little deeper into this, and I'll give you a specific example. So, I work with Anthropic's Claude quite frequently, and I've got at any given time I've probably got three different Claude projects going. One focused on marketing, one focused on my next book, one focused on something else, and Claude is always ready to go. Right?
Yeah.
Claude doesn't have to context switch. Claude has the context loaded up right in the project. But if I go from this window and then to that window, and I got to go, okay, now where was I? Claude's done running the routine over here. And now I'm bouncing over to this next project. Okay, where was I? I got to reread all this stuff that Claude just told me about this project. What I like to do is just kind of get up out of my chair, go get tea, or go out to my garden, pick a few weeds, come back in, and then dive back in. Is it as simple as a little kind of just even getting up out of your chair and taking a deep breath? What is it actually that I could be doing better to make that context switching more effective?
Actually a very effective tool that you are finding. And you probably stumbled onto that through repetition and started saying, gosh, when I do that, I come back and I am more effective and efficient. What we know about the brain science in that, and this is part of our renewable, we have a section in our book talking about renewal. How do I renew my attentional systems and energies faster so that I can make these contact switches quicker? And one of the things that they have found is getting outside and doing nature walks, or what they're talking about is unattended attention. So you're kind of walking through the garden, you just see something and you're pulling it, but your mind's wandering. You're not sort of locked in or thinking about something. And one of the things that we find to be a real big fault for a lot of folks right now is when they get a break, they jump on their device.
Yeah.
And they start to scroll. And while it's appealing and you do get a little bit of a dopamine hit, your attentional systems actually drain. Whereas going outside, looking at landscapes, being by water, mountains, trees, they find that some of those patterns of just in the occipital lobe of the brain charges the batteries just a bit faster. And so then when you come back, you have more energy to lock in and focus on the tasks that you're interested in. So we do that very often. We start to structure, and these are the types of plans that you want to get into play if you want to be really efficient in your day. Is when is my maximum sort of attentional span? And then what do I do to break that or to recycle it faster? And taking quick breaks between projects can be a really great solution.
All right. So I run these things called mentorship moments. I'm putting a capable leader in front of you right now who's very proud about how much they can juggle. They've got millions of browser tabs open. They've got 2 new AI tools that the boss wants live by Friday, and they're going to get it done. They wear their busyness like a badge. But they're like, oh my God, my best thinking is I just can't do it anymore, and they really can't figure out why. What's the conversation that you have with this person to help them regain their attention, other than going outside and like I do and looking at my garden?
Yeah, the first thing that we do is we start to dive into really what is the awareness around when they're optimal. The things that we found with athletes, but also with leaders, is that you start to see these patterns for yourself of when I'm optimal, what was I doing? And then when I'm less than optimal, what was I doing? And we start to trace that back, and we get it all the way back to attentional mapping. And we start to say, where were you and where are you and what were you doing around those peak performances? And then you start to see patterns. And that awareness gives people agency. And once they start to understand when I'm at my best, these are some of the things that I'm doing. And when I'm at my worst, these are some of the things that I'm doing. And we look at that and we say, okay, now let's expand that. So is it a sprint or are we running a marathon? And if I'm running a marathon, I have to have a different strategy than if I'm running a sprint. I can't go out of the gate and just attack, attack, attack. I've got to be more systemic and systematic about how I'm approaching this. So we start to get into and say, okay, we're not talking about just peak moments to get this deadline. We understand that might be a sprint, but how do you do this day in and day out for a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years on end, if your goal is to get to that level? And those are the awareness things that we start to dive into. And there's a ton of cues that you can do to prompt this, but it really gets back to mapping your attention and understanding why your attention goes to those things. And that's tied to a lot of personal attributes, our identity, our values, things like that.
Right, right. So you've said the words renewal a few times during the show, and you close the book with renewal, the idea that recovery and restoration are the foundation of sustained success. But we live in this culture where we get rewarded for being always on, and the person who's checking their email at 3 a.m., wow, they're doing such a great job, when it's really not all that wonderful and productive. Why did you decide that training focus had to end with a person's ability to rest and recover, and how do I do that? You're not talking about a vacation here, are you?
No, we're not. I mean, I think those things, it's interesting. Even the vacations, what we find is people have a hard time turning it off. So the highest performers, you're running. They say it takes me 2 to 3 days to unwind, even when they're on vacation. And oftentimes they don't get more than 4 or 5 days. So they're unwinding for 3 of those, get maybe 1 day of a breath, and then they're kind of revving back up because they feel the anxiety of getting back into it.
I need a vacation from my vacation.
That's exactly what a lot of people say.
Sad.
And so where we got to, though, how we got to the renewal is very much what we saw in the performance spaces with athletes, is that a lot of them wanted it so bad that they would push, and they would break down. Their bodies would break down and they would get physically injured. And so we started to say, oh, well, how does that injury or that breakdown actually help you get to your goal? And so now we're doing a lot of tracking, and we're doing this. We can do this in real time with our wearables today. We can measure our stress levels, our sleep, our energy batteries, HRV, a lot of different tools that we can keep a track on. And most of our leaders and athletes, we're advising to do this. Look at your biometrics, because it will give you early indications of what and how to regulate. Can I hit the gear? Do I need to drive it back a little bit? And is my plan, my structure working for me? Meaning, am I finding the renewable energy, and can I sustain this? And so we find that if you're not balancing that stress level consistently, you will burn out and you will start to make poorer decisions. And we talk about the brain science of what happens when we pass our stress threshold, and how the brain starts to lock in and get more narrow, and we get defensive. We don't work well with others. There's a whole list of things. And then, as you know, it doesn't just end at the workplace. If I'm stressed, I'm bringing that stress home. Now I'm having issues with family members or loved ones. And then what tends to happen for a lot of us is we try to find different sort of fill-ups, and that could be substance use. That could be some sort of other outlet that doesn't sustain us. And so what we're really trying to help here is say, let's get that agency back to the individual, but they got to have awareness, and they got to have a plan on really what's going on here. And there are great tools that we can now use to really elevate our games. And that's what we're bringing to you.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about sports performance here, but for the average business leader, it always amazes me when I hear the statistic about how much of my daily caloric intake is used up by my brain, right? This thing between my ears, what is it, like 20% of all my caloric intake? And I'm probably wrong on the specific statistic, but I'm in the right ballpark. It's a
Sure.
big number. Our
Huge number.
brain takes a lot of energy, and the more, especially in leadership and management positions, all this context switching, it takes a lot of energy, physical energy to do that. So, gosh, why am I so exhausted? Well, because your brain
Yeah.
has been using a boatload of energy today. So it just becomes what you've been teaching us during this episode just becomes a lot more obvious, at least to me, when I make that connection to the food that I'm eating and the quality of the food that I'm eating to feed this engine that sits between my ears. Am I on the right track?
You are so on the right track. Some studies that we've read, and I'm not sure how validated they are, but I do believe it's close to this, which is they have found that chess players, at least high elite level chess players, burn more calories than marathon runners. And so you think about that, the amount of brain power and energy that is being used to sit and make decisions and, forecast and think and anticipate it's remarkable. And that's what we're asking a lot of our leaders to do today is those types of chess playing moves. And I think it's even harder than playing chess because we're working with people that are variable and emotional, and they're dealing with their own burnout. And so what might be logical doesn't always kind of play out the way that we want to in leadership spaces, as you all know.
Yeah. So leader, manager, individual contributor, you are an athlete. Everybody that's listening to this podcast right now is an athlete, and you need to take care of yourself. Justin, what have we not covered today that you want to make sure that our listeners understand about what you're up to?
I think the one thing that comes up a lot for leaders and for athletes, and I to your point, this is for performers of any way, and I think we're performing in every realm that we're in. Whether it's a relationship, whether it's being a parent, whether it's being an individual contributor. But one of the things that I often get is people will come and say, I feel like all I do is focus on or worry about the threats. It's worry about the future, what's coming, or, kind of hold on to the past and what has just happened. And they sit in a space where their mind is sort of occupying and churning through what we call the threat detection cycle. And it's a really common thing that I think it's important for us to know there's nothing wrong with your brain if you're doing that. It actually is designed to do that. It is the number one filter for the human mind is survival. So it's looking to how do we survive? And so what does it that need to do then? It's going to scan for potential threats. And in the past, those threats used to be shelter and how am I going to get food and, how are we going to have some security? But it got turned off as soon as we got the deer or we got the meal, we could relax. Today, these issues are more about ego and career and comparison. And we have things at our fingertips that are constantly pointing us to those comparisons and that you need more and you need to do this and you need X, Y, and Z to be at that level. And that keeps that threat detection on. And so we're not finding that renewal space as often as we need to. And so there's nothing wrong with the brain, but we do need to choose to find some strategies on how to get off of the threat cycle.
Yeah. Lions, tigers, and bears were out to get us before, but now it's our devices that are out to get us, and they're programmed to do just that. Justin, let's finish with a few lightning round questions, shall we?
All right. Let's do it.
Yeah, Justin, Justin Anderson, you've just won $100 million in a lotto jackpot, but there's a stipulation that half of your net winnings go to one philanthropic organization or a general cause. Who do you pick?
I love that question. I think I'd go with the Cancer Research Institute. It's hit people in my family and certainly a lot of people that I love, and it's a great organization. And I believe like around 90% of 83 to 90% of every dollar goes to direct research on that. So it's not going to, inflate other dollar, leaders of those spaces. It's a really good, philanthropic organization.
Excellent. Justin, I give you access to a really little time machine. You can send a message to an earlier version of yourself. What's the message and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
Ooh, I would send it to early adulthood, Justin, and it would be lock in on the focus sooner. Don't take 15 to 20 years to really understand that that's the tool, that's the thing, because it would have accelerated my health, my development, and we could have been further along today. But all those things were things that led here, so I'm grateful.
Excellent. Justin, we're all works in progress. You help other people learn and grow and be better versions of themselves. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I'm working on is refining the questions that I ask myself when I set my intentions in the morning and my structured reflection that I do at the end of the day. And I book in my days with those two things because if I set my intention, I have a much better subconscious chance of driving myself towards that consciously and subconsciously to get to those places that I want to get to. But the reflection is where we find real growth happens. And it usually happens after disruption or when we hit some type of adversity or something that didn't go the way that we wanted it to. But having some structure around understanding why that happened and was it mapped back to my intention? Is there anything I could do tomorrow to set my intention to get through those adversities or those context switching faster? And if I do that cycle and I continue to do that, more refine, I get there better and faster.
Excellent. The personal after action review. Excellent.
That's it.
All right. Justin, where can folks get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me at premiersportspsychology.com is probably the best way to go. My email is at janderson@premiersportspsychology.com.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I think we added a lot of value for our listeners today, so thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you for having me.
All right. My name is Andy Tempe, and this is the Balancing Act Podcast. You can find the show on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public educational good with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and maybe a neighbor down the street. The show is produced by Nicholas Tempe, and we'll see you next time on The Balancing Act.